So 50 videos on the Rad Music Chat channel. So we're going to do something a bit different, a bit special. Hope you're as excited as I am. Let's get into it. Now then, guys, Quinn's Dude here, back on the Rad Music Chat channel. Thank you so much for joining once again. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because as I always say, something will eventually come up on the channel that you'll be interested in. That way you'll know whenever I upload something new. If you do enjoy this video at the end, down below is the thumbs up button. That'd be great. And any comments, hopefully on this video, there'll be quite a few. So episode 50, how did we do that? Started the channel just a few months ago. Lots and lots of positive feedback. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying doing it, and that's the main reason. And if you guys enjoy any of the stuff that I put out, then bonus. So what are we doing for episode 50? I've decided to do something that the channel hasn't actually done yet, which is do a countdown video. So a lot of content creators on YouTube that I enjoy watching will do different subjects, and will do 10 albums that never nearly got made, or 10 amazing second albums, or whatever. The third album has long been seen as a difficult hurdle for a band or an artist to successfully clear, usually having been together for years before they record the first album. They therefore have enough material to often fill the first and second with tried and tested songs. When it comes to record number 3, often the well is dry. So the following is basically just 10 examples, no order, of where artists gave a big middle finger to the third album, Curse. There already exists a million articles out there, and videos and what have you on wonderful albums such as 3 by Led Zeppelin, Master of Puppets, Metallica, Rain in Blood, Slayer, OK Computer, Radiohead, and on and on. So this is just maybe ever so slight deviation from some of the usual suspects. There probably will be a few in here that you're like, if he doesn't cover this, then he's mad. Maybe you'll discover something new with the selections I've made, maybe not. Also, feel free to comment on any of these, or any that you feel I've left out. So yeah, in no order whatsoever, we are starting with Screamadelica by Scottish rockers Primal Scream. Primal Scream were a fairly fair to middling indie rock band before Screamadelica, and influenced by the likes of reggae and dub and gospel and soul. The band were quite diverse in their tastes, and they were also big into the acid house scene at the time. And so they brought in the hottest DJ that was around the release of Screamadelica, which was 1991. And they brought in Andrew Weatherall. Weatherall took the tracks that the band had already laid down, completely tore them apart, adding loads of different elements, and putting them together in an almost unrecognizable but ultimately way better and groundbreaking guys. Screamadelica is just a ridiculously varied but cohesive piece of work. It's essentially a rock band that's made a dance orientated album, and it resembles nothing like the previous 2 albums. The album took in fans from all corners of music tastes, sold over 3 million copies, and won the Mercury Music Prize in 1992, and pretty much set Primal Scream on their way to be one of the most respected, and every time they released an album it was super anticipated. Next up is Electric by The Cult from 1987. Riding high off the back of their seminal second album, Love, which is the one that has that Cult song on it, She Sells Sanctuary. The Cult could have carried on in that goth rock direction. They did so well in it, but they decided to strip all the textures and threw away the delay and chorus pedals. And pay homage to the likes of AC/DC, Ted Nugent, Led Zeppelin, with a balls out rock and roll record. This was guitarist Billy Duffy's baby. Duffy is, for me, the star of the show here, with his no-nonsense power chords and blues-influenced solos. Ian Astbury's voice works so well over this style of material and allows the self-styled wolf child, as he is, to put his best faux American accent, which will forgive him because it works so well. The rhythm section of Stewart and Warner do their best Rudd and Williams of AC/DC impression, just keeping it solid and tight for the two front guys, Duffy and Astbury, to flaunt their wares. Aesthetically, the band did overhaul themselves too. They came, in came the cut-off denim jackets, Led Zepp tees, cowboy boots. The black was toned down, and any velvet and lace was done away with. Choose any track on Electric. They're all as great as each other. I guess maybe highlights would be Wildflower, Lil Devil, Love Removal Machine. There is a cover of Born to Be Wild, which is not good. The album would have been much better without that. Nevertheless, the rest of the album is excellent, and America fell in love with it. Next up, we have In Utero by Nirvana. Now, whether this kind of falls into that category of, was it a misstep or was it a step of genius? It's not quite as unanimous as a lot of these other third albums. Basically, this is the album that Kurt Cobain had always wanted to make. It had taken the runaway success of Nevermind, the World Changer, to show him what he really needed to see. And the result was these painfully frank and at times quite hard to listen to 12 tracks. Enlisting Steve Albini to produce the record was basically in reaction to the very polished sound that Butch Vig and Andy Wallace had got on Nevermind. Cobain deliberately wanted to make a much rawer sounding album, whilst taking listeners to more extremes that had been explored on Nevermind. He wanted the poppier songs to be poppier and the harder songs to be harder. And the important thing was getting a really good live sound in the studio, which they did. And they set themselves a goal of just getting everything down in 2 weeks. Tracks such as Serve the Servants, that kicks off the album, Scentless Apprentice, and Very Ape, all sound really edgy and real. And the new approach to recording on this album as well, for the softer songs like Heart-Shaped Box, Penny Royal Tea, and All Apologies, made them sound so much more human and poignant. David Geffen of the band's label, Geffen Records, actually admitted after the fact that they were a bit disappointed that the band didn't submit another Nevermind, but after the sales and the anticipation for another album from Nirvana, they were going to release anything that the band submitted to them anyway. It is pleasing that that Cobain got to deliver the album that he wanted to, because a mere 7 months later, of course, he was found dead. I did and ah about including this next one, which is War by U2, just because of the kind of very hard reaction that to the very mention of U2's name can give. But this was a long time ago and was a very different U2 than the one we have now. Against a backdrop of unrest and warfare, U2 reacted with their third album, which was much more direct and harsher, both lyrically and musically, than their first two albums, Boy and October. It proved to be quite a pivotal decision in the band's development. In an interview with NME, Bono actually said at the time, shortly after recording the album, "We seemed to be the motif for 1982." Adding that everywhere you looked, from the Falklands to the Middle East and South Africa, there was war. So by calling the album that, we were giving everyone a slap in the face, and at the same time getting away from the cozy image that a lot of people had of U2. Of course, the album is very well known for the opening track, Sunday Bloody Sunday, which has these brilliant call and response vocals, and the staccato drumming in it is very reminiscent of Machine Gun Fire that would have been quite common in a commoner sound in Northern Ireland, which is, you know, something that the song is talking about, the troubles there. This remains an ever present in their set. Other highlights include the beautiful New Year's Day with that piano riff, and the choppy love song, Two Hearts Beat as One. Interestingly enough, I feel that the War captures the band at the pinnacle of like their post-punk phase, and the album's fourth track, Like a Song, basically addresses those that criticize the band for not being punk enough, and in turn missing the point of what punk rock was originally meant to be about, which was, you know, doing your own thing. Bono felt that those that the song was aimed at were more about what the movement had been dressed up as, rather than what its true intent was. I'm gonna go a bit left field with this next one. It's the Charlatans with Up to Our Hips. Now, it might be seen as a bit of a strange choice, this one, because it's hardly one of the most talked about albums that the Charlatans released, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is an excellent third album. It's a worthy inclusion because it's as well as having great songs on it, it's quite a transitional album. So what it does is it takes the baggy, semi-shoegazing leaning of the first two albums and kind of mixes it a bit with a more rocking Brit rock vibe, bit more swagger to it that would come on later releases. From what I gather, at the time, the band were kind of struggling to find their place in the post Oasis world of 1994. Definitely maybe had basically come out and turned introverted, you know, floppy fringed young men into sort of mod urchin haircutted slack-jawed types. You know, Shed 7 had arrived as the Yorkshire Rolling Stones. Blur had gone from baggy, arty types to mod-like lad rockers with Park Life. And you know, Ride were trying their hardest to be the Birds. So the Charlatans just went and did what felt natural, and wrote 10 great indie rock songs. What I feel that the Charlatans did on this album is they took, you know, some of their, as I say, the sort of more wistful elements of the first couple of albums, injected a little bit more balls into it, I guess, for want of a better word, without being overly macho. The balance basically was perfectly struck, and what they did was they wrote some perfect sort of summery guitar-led pop tracks. Jesus Hairdo for one, Can't Get Out of Bed, which you know, those filled indie nightclub dance floors for at least the rest of the 90s. Next up, another album from 1994, and it's the unbelievably huge Smash by The Offspring. Basically, something weird happened in 1994, and Californian punk rock became huge. That year alone saw the release of Dookie by Green Day, Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion, and Punkin' Drublet by NoFX. These albums have all never been matched commercially by their respective artists, and never will be. No one really knows why the explosion of that skate punk, Southern Californian punk, pop punk, whatever you want to call it, took off in that year. But one thing is for sure, that the quality of each of these releases had a hell of a lot to do with it. Smash is still the biggest selling album to ever be released on an independent record label. Epitaph Records released Smash, and it's sold over 16 million copies worldwide to date. I mean, that's just a ridiculous for four punk dudes from Orange County. It's absolutely crazy. There's a lot of folklore around this album and how Epitaph Records couldn't make copies to meet the demand, and had to hire warehouses downtown in LA to store all the copies that were coming in, because it was just selling faster than they could get it out the door. There's some huge singles on here. I mean, there's Self-Esteem, Gotta Get Away, and Come Out and Play. It's, you know, there's album tracks on here as well, like that are really special. Opener Nitro would make like the laziest slacker want to grab his skateboard and tear up round his neighborhood. Genocide has such a memorable lead guitar line that just doesn't leave your brain for days after spinning the album. Basically, the topics, so although they put it across in quite maybe a bit of a boneheaded way, the topics on there are actually quite dark, which the Offspring have often kept going, even though they're overshadowed by a lot of what, you know, are classed as their novelty songs. I mean, this is after all, this was the time around, you know, a couple of years after the LA riots. There's depressions discussed on here, pollution. Anyway, the material on here, and the melodies and the attitude and the hunger, it all still sounds like fresh as a daisy. So put it on, spin it, and just try and remember that next year this album is 30 years old. Okay, on to this monster, and regular viewers will know that I will call albums monsters quite often, but this was an absolute, you couldn't get away from this thing. Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette, released in June of 95. No one outside of Canada had heard of Alanis Morissette before this album. This was the first album to actually get a worldwide release. Her first couple of albums were actually dance pop, believe it or not. The story goes that Morissette had moved from her native Ottawa to Los Angeles and had hooked up with, she met producer Glenn Ballard, and they just had an instant connection and started writing, and the influence was coming from a lot of the grunge music that was around at the time, or what was referred to grunge. I don't believe in that as a genre itself, but yeah, the kind of alternative rock, grunge, and pop rock that was around at the time. Suffice to say that Jagged Little Pill was a success, sold over 33 million copies, making Morissette the first Canadian artist to go double diamond. The album was nominated for 9 Grammys and won 5 of them, including Best Album. It's funny, with the passage of time, as liberal and as forward-thinking as we like to think of the 90s were, this Morissette and this album really did do so much for women in rock. And although there had been trailblazers before, it was the sheer success and the inability to escape from Morissette and the tracks from this album that really pushed things forward. So the likes of what Liz Phair had done previously, or Sinead O'Connor, which was just women writing really honest, edgy, and you know, for some people slightly uncomfortable music. Despite the songs like You Ought to Know and Hand in My Pocket and Ironic all being fantastic songs, this album, without this album and Alanis Morissette, you don't have, by their own admission, you don't have the likes of Meredith Brooks, Pink, Shakira, Avril Lavigne, Katy Perry, Kelly Clarkson. Although, I'm not sure if any of that is a good thing, right? There is absolutely no way that I could do a video on great third albums without talking about The Holy Bible by Manic Street Preachers. As awesome as the first two Manic's albums are, make no mistake, they are wonderful albums. The band felt that they'd gone too far down their kind of American rock influences and were into a lot of things like you know, taking a lot of influences from things like Guns N' Roses and Alice in Chains, and they wanted to on the Holy Bible get back to the sort of stuff that influenced them when they first formed the band. So punk and post-punk, things like Public Image Limited, Gang of Four, Magazine, the Skids, stuff like that, Joy Division. So much can be said for this album that it deserves a video of its own, and that will happen. The Holy Bible is where the band decided to really talk about a lot of uncomfortable things. Now, normally on the previous two albums, the lyrical content would be split between bass player Nicky Wire and guitar player Richie Edwards, pretty much 50-50, but on this one it was 70-30 in favor of Edwards. The band almost used the album to write like essays. The lyrics deal with things such as what have we got on here? We've got prostitution, American consumerism and capitalism, British imperialism, freedom of speech, the Holocaust, anorexia, serial killers, the death penalty, political revolution, fascism, just, you know, all the ills and horrible things that you can think of. This album sort of addressed it, and it was a very uncomfortable listen for people who were expecting the third album to sound like the first two. As anyone that had an interest in British rock music and indie music around that time, and Manic's fans as well obviously will know, this was around the time that Edwards was at his lowest ebb and would ultimately vanish, and has still never been found what actually has happened to him. Again, that's a whole other story, as fascinating as it is. Interestingly, he is a very troubled but very smart guy, and some of the lyrical content on this album, the track, for example, PCP. Now, if you think this album was released in 1994, but the track, he said, was about how followers of political correctness take up the idea of being liberal but end up being quite the opposite. Now, how poignant is that today with the whole woke culture? Musically, this album is really angular as well, and just fits the lyrical content and the whole mood. It really is one of those albums that you can initially hate it, and then end up absolutely fascinated and in love with it. And I definitely went down that route. Aesthetically as well, around this time is really interesting. The band got into trouble. They were on Top of the Pops, and they wore balaclavas. They were wearing a lot of surplus army gear, and then had almost like a paramilitary and a terrorist look about them as well. This next album on the list is a bit of a selfish choice, but one that I feel deserves to be here nonetheless, and it's definitely going to be the act on here that a lot of people won't have heard of. It's the album You Come Before You by Floridian hardcore band Poison the Well. Poison the Well's debut album, The Opposite of December, is actually seen as one of the most important albums in the evolution of heavy music, and as big as that sounds, that's a genuine claim. Basically, the evolution of hardcore and the invention of the genre metalcore owes itself to The Opposite of December. Always innovators, never followers. Basically, a lot like bands like Thrice, the Dillinger Escape Plan, Thursday, Refused, Champion, 18 Visions. Not maybe sounding particularly like those bands, but just they all kind of spawned micro genres within heavy music. Although it's nothing new for vocalists in any kind of band to be getting inspiration from looking inward. A lot of it comes off as, insincere and trite. Frontman and absolute monster vocalist Jeffrey Moore from Poison the Well was so good at addressing personal issues without any hint of posturing at all. This is where he went from really good to a master of it. On You Come Before You, Poison the Well were very clever with the fact that they changed tack a little bit from their previous approach on the first two albums, but embraced more influences, and expanding their palette, I guess, but without straying too far from what had made them so initially revered. I remember at the time this was it was the first album by the band and the only one of their 5 releases that they ended up releasing that came out on a major label, and a lot of the fear was that they were going to, people were prepared for the worst and they were going to release something watered down, dumbed down, more accessible. But not only did the band do the exact opposite of that, but they produced pretty much a career best at the same time. Choosing highlights, throw a dart, as I like to say, but I guess Meeting Again for the First Time, Apathy Is a Cold Body, Sounds Like the End of the World, Crystal Lake. What this album did was raised Poison the Well's profile and further cemented their legacy as trailblazers. So last but very, very certainly not least is Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy. Now, I feel like Public Enemy's importance and cultural impact has kind of strangely been dulled and sort of forgotten in the years since they were at their most effective and active. For a start, to follow 1988's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back was never going to be easy. That album itself is also hugely important, but Fear of a Black Planet has gone down as one of the most culturally important recorded works of all time. Main man and brains of the operation, Chuck D, is such a smart guy, and on this album he decided he wanted to utilize the production talents again of the Bomb Squad. Their really dense and thick layer is like was called the hip-hop version of Ronnie Spector's Wall of Sound. Musically, as impressive as it is, it's still pulling from the well of what most hip-hop does, like funk and soul and rock, to great effect. But it's really in Chuck D's lyrical content that things are just mind-blowing. Burn Hollywood Burn, for example, basically, is talking about the use of black stereotypes in the movie industry, which was going on so much, and something that people didn't think that the black community were finding offensive. Who Stole the Soul? That talks about the music industry's exploitation of black artists. Revolutionary Generation talks about black feminism, and also I mean, you think about this is 1990, gangster rap's massive, and this song's talking about how wrong misogyny is in hip hop culture. It's just he's almost like he's almost like the Malcolm X of hip hop, if that makes sense. It's funny how sometimes when a track becomes so popular that the actual message and impact of it can be a bit lost. So take Fight the Power, for example. Fight the Power, talks about how there's some American icons that owe themselves to African American culture. So it talks about Elvis calls him a racist, which shocked a lot of people at the time. I mean, make no mistake as well about Public Enemy is obviously everyone knows Flavor Flav as the sort of crazy little guy that had the the big clocks around his neck. But the thing is he wrote the song 911 is a joke on the album, and that talked about how there was just a lack of police response in predominantly African American neighborhoods. And I mean, the thing is there were artists around this time saying this kind of stuff, but they just weren't saying it in the way that Public Enemy were. And that's what kicked down the doors and made a lot of sort of conservative and rather staid white media outlets. They couldn't ignore Public Enemy because of the intelligence of how they were putting across these views. Thank you so much if you've watched this far, guys. Really appreciate it. We will go back to the old format of keeping things sub 10 minutes, but just for the 50th video, I just wanted to make it a bit different and do one of these longer form videos. Down below as well, I will put timestamps so you can actually see where the different album chapters start, so you can forward and back to them as you please, or whatever you're not interested in, you can skip. So I will see you again soon. Thank you very much, and don't forget, stay rad.